Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast. Here's your host, Pete Tigers.
Hi everyone and welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast. I think the term influential is used a little too easily these days. When it comes to my guest today though, I don't think there is a better word to describe the impact he has had on fly fishing. From designing rods for Hardy and Grays for a number of years, winning the individual World Fly Fishing Championship, writing numerous articles in the fishing press, and being one of the most gifted fly casters I've had the pleasure to throwing a line with. He has his finger firmly on the pulse of fly fishing. I've tried to sort this interview for a while now, but I'm pleased to have got him here. And I'd really like to welcome Howard Croston to the podcast. Howard, it's great to have you along, pal. How are you doing?
I'm not bad, Pete. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me on, mate.
It's great to have teed this up at long last, but I guess we better start off with the weather because that's getting in the way of things a little, isn't it?
Just a little bit. I'm not even say the river's flooded, but actually getting to the river's flooded. That's the issue. So, yeah, there's not been too much river fishing this back end for me since we came back from the Worlds in Slovakia, to be honest. So I've just been lake fishing for the last few weeks, if anything.
And do you like that mix as well, coming, as you say, from an intense river background into just having some fun on some still waters? Is that a nice way to unwind?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't get me wrong, I still do a lot of competitions on, like, in the Northeast, we've got a really strong, small still water sort of competition scene going on. There's a lot of different competitions all through the winter. So I do a lot of that in the winter. I tend not to do as much of that in the summer. But, with the winters we tend to get now, blowing all of the grayling fishing out to a large degree, I've got to keep fishing. I can't really go too long without wetting a line, no matter where it is. So I do a lot of still water stuff in the winter.
And does that mean with grayling being washed out, like you say, that you're looking at other species? Do you look for pike, for example? Is that something that's on the menu for you as well?
I'll be honest, I don't do much of it. I've done a reasonable amount in the past. I fished down on Chew years and years ago, quite a lot with John Horsey before it was really popular and before everybody was doing it, and had some phenomenal fishing down there when there was nobody else, very few people doing it. And over the years, I've fished on Esthwaite in Cumbria a little bit and had some very big pike out of there on the fly, especially when I lived over there, so that's more than 20 years ago. But it's not something I do all that often now, to be honest. I'd rather put the time that I have into, honestly, either practicing or prepping for a lot of competitions. So for still water stuff and for river stuff for the following season. So I tend to do that through the winter.
Got you. And does that mean you're not so busy at the Vice? Will you be tying stuff as well? Or does that go with the practicing and you're figuring out and working on patterns throughout that time?
Yeah, I do a lot of tying in the winter. I'll be honest, it's quite weird really, because what tends to happen is I'll do a lot of pre-prep for any big competitions that are coming up, but I still nearly always end up tying right before the competition. So when we go away for a Worlds or whatever, I'll tie right through the practice. And typically it's the flies I've tied whilst I'm there that tend to be the ones that get used versus the ones that I've spent months and months and months tying previously. When I went to Tasmania for the Worlds in 19, I literally tied thousands of flies, and I tied a handful when I was there, and then were the ones that I fished with. I didn't actually use anything I'd tied beforehand. So, figure that one out.
Does that mean we have to look on eBay for those ones then?
Oh, no, I'm keeping them just in case. They're all stockpiled upstairs in the loft. So you never know. I will use them at some point.
And is there a comfort in having every base, and we're looking at extremes where we're talking about this, but is there a comfort in making sure that you've got every base covered, and then when you get there might be a pattern that, like you say, there may be only a few that you use, but you've got enough just in case?
Yeah, I mean, it's more for me, especially when you're going somewhere you haven't been before. I'll use Taz as an example. So we had all this information about what kind of fly patterns, and we had loads of good patterns that we knew were the right patterns. The only thing that we did wrong when we did a lot of the pre-tying was we tied them all too heavily dressed. Because when we got there, we realised that the flies they were using were very, very skinny. So a lot of it was streamers, like damsel imitations and dragonfly imitations, things like that. And we tied them quite heavy. So a heavy marabou tail, fairly densely permed body, all that kind of stuff. And they were just too much. The fish were not keen on an overdressed pattern. It had to be very, very slim. Just when it was wet, it was almost like a blade of grass. It was very thin. So basically, what we tied wasn't right for the job.
And that fascinates me. Does that come from picking up sort of local information or intel, or does that from practice time coming into the competition that you guys figure that out?
Oh, it was a little bit of both. We were really lucky in Taz. We had 3 really good local guides between the sort of 6-man team, and those guys were, if anything, overly helpful. I mean, they really did put us on the right track. And then we practiced with some of our stuff to see whether it was any better or any worse, and it was definitely worse. So that's when really we just started to tie exactly what they were using. As the locals.
Perfect. We're going to move on to competition fishing a little bit later, but it's nice to get an early insight to it. But I wondered, as somebody, as I said in the description, you always have seemed to me that somebody, as I said, has their finger on the pulse of things. And how does fly fishing look to you right now? What sort of shape does it look in? Is it in rude health? Is it in feeling good to you?
I think so. I'll be honest. I think it's a little bit of a mixed picture. I think there's definitely not enough young people coming through. That's an issue that I think we're all well aware of. And I do try, and where I can, to encourage some of the younger anglers that I bump into up here and a few different places. But then on the flip side of that, just like this weekend just gone, we've just fished a big new competition that Grays is partly sponsoring, called the Big One, which is like a big small still water competition based in the northeast. And that competition had like 5-6 heats of 30 anglers in every heat, and it was all fully subscribed. And then we had a 30-man final over 2 days. So it's, in that respect, some of it is very sort of vital and quite a lot going on. But I think it's just a bit of a mixed picture, really, overall.
Great. And I'd like to learn a little bit more about yourself as well. And did you have the traditional route into fly fishing? Did you sort of go the course, then Stillwater Reservoir Rivers? Was that the route that we'd sometimes call the more traditional route into fly fishing?
Yeah, so for me, I'll be honest, I was really fortunate. So my father was a course fisherman. He didn't really fly fish. So he took me course fishing a little bit. But I was quite ill when I was young, and my parents, I had some lung problems and breathing problems, and my parents bought a holiday home in the Lake District, for the cleaner and all that kind of stuff. And it was located right on a trout river. Now you could bait fish there, which is what I started doing at first. But my uncle was a keen fly angler, and my dad got into fly fishing a little bit when we had that place there in the lakes. And it turned out that river was actually really quite difficult to fish with a fly rod. It was quite overgrown, difficult casting, a lot of actually quite big fish, all wild fish, not stocked, and tricky to catch. So I basically learned how to fly fish in a very, very hard scenario. And I can remember very, very clearly, even when I was quite young, doing a lot of sight fishing with small nymphs, thin line, all that kind of stuff. So I think I was really lucky in that, and this is, again, no offence to anybody or any kind of fishing, but I think what happens now a little bit is sometimes people, when they start off on the fly fishing journey, they start off on very heavily stocked small still waters, which is great because it does make fishing accessible. and it's good sport, like a lot of different kinds of fly fishing. But sometimes I don't think people progress past that. And because a lot of these fisheries are very, very well stocked, it doesn't always generate some of the skills, the basic skills, which you could need when you start to branch out into other kinds of fishing. So I think I was quite lucky because from an early age, I started with herd fishing and I learned on herd fishing. And all of those skills have really sort of, I personally believe, have set me up as I've gone on and fished through different places over the years.
Do you think that is the difference between how people like ourselves and probably many of the people listening as well? That for you talked about the small still waters. Do you think that is a function of them? That's just something they do, whereas to many of us, it's a whole lot more. So that's why you're looking to progress, move on, experience different things. Do you think that is where that sometimes can just be a stopping point for people and they don't really want to explore it any further?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, if you enjoy catching a fish with a fly rod, I'm not really bothered what species it is, where you fish for it. You know, that's not for me or anybody else to judge, really. If you get pleasure out of that, that's 100% great, you know, because we need more fly fishermen at the end of the day. I just think that sometimes when people get into that small stillwater scenario, when they start in that small stillwater scenario, because don't get me wrong, it can be very hard fishing at times. You know, pressure can really affect it. If it gets fished a lot, it can become difficult fishing. But generally speaking, if you go to a lot of small still waters, particularly in the northeast where I live now, you're almost guaranteed some sport during the day. You're going to catch some fish, and sometimes you're going to catch an awful lot of fish. Whereas, like I mentioned, for me, when I set off, going to the river, it was a long way from a foregone conclusion that I was going to catch anything. It was often, you know, several days of work and effort, and then I catch something. So I just think sometimes that route into fishing, that small stillwater route, sometimes people don't extend themselves past that, you know. But like I said, each to their own, and that's, you know, if you enjoy it, that's the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So when did you realise that this thing that you were doing on this really tricky river, was that the sort of, it seems as though it was the starting point for you, but where was the tipping point where you thought, yeah, this is for me, this is the thing that I'm going to be into?
I don't know, really. I mean, I can remember very vividly when I switched from fishing with a bait rod to a fly rod. And it was because I was bait fishing one day in the summer, and I don't know what had caused it, but there was all of a sudden there was a lot of they were either wasps, I think they were wasps, dropping out of a wasp's nest onto the river out of a tree, and the fish were going nuts. They were just boiling under them. They weren't actually eating them, I don't think, but they were just boiling underneath them, and I couldn't catch anything with my bait rod. So I ran back and picked my fly rod up, which I'd used a few times, and caught a load of fish. I mean, like 3 or 4, which in, you know, when you were maybe catching one every couple of weeks with a fly rod, it was a load of fish. You know, and that for me then, I started to do more of it. And it was my dad who pushed me into a casting competition because I've been casting a lot on this tricky river. You know, there was an accuracy competition at the Lowther Country Fair, it was. And he pushed me into that. And the first year I entered the juniors, I was second and didn't expect to sort of win anything. And then I can vividly remember from that afterwards practicing solid from that August to the next August, and then entering all of the competitions. And I did quite well that second time I entered. And that was it, really. You know, never sort of stopped from there on.
So are you the sort of person that when they decide they're going to embark on something, they do it as best as they possibly can and to the best of their ability?
Yeah, generally speaking, you know, I've really only had 2 sort of hobbies in my lifetime so far, if you like. And obviously the main one is fishing. And I've flirted on and off over the years with a couple of different martial arts, but I did quite a lot of kickboxing for quite a few years, which I've sort of drifted out again. I've stopped doing that now since COVID. But when I did get back into it after quite a long break, I think I got back into it when I was about 34. So between sort of 34 and COVID, I went from sort of just starting off to being halfway through my gradings for being a black belt. So in a relatively short period of time, but I was going sort of 3-4 times a week, and then COVID happened, and to be honest, I stopped and put on about 1.5 stone, and I've never been back. So, and I'm getting older as well, so it's not, and to be honest, I'd rather just fish. So, yeah, but when I do get into something, I do tend to try and, I'll not say I get a bit obsessed with it, but I do have some obsessive tendencies with things like that sometimes.
Yeah. And you said that when your dad put you into these accuracy competitions that you practiced and practiced and practiced. Does that mean that a lot of your casting skill came from self-tuition, or did you have a mentor, or was your dad your mentor?
No, so I was self-taught for a long while, and I had some good results. But my dad wanted to get me some proper lessons. So I went to see Peter Mackenzie Phillips, who was I think he was the chairman of that guy or something at the time. And Peter was a lovely man, and I had one lesson, and my dad paid for the lesson. And it was quite a long drive from our house. And Peter, at the end of it, basically said, "You can bring you back any time you want, and it's free." And he never charged us again for another lesson. So Peter gave me a lot of help with the basics, getting things right, and that helped massively. And then I was very fortunate after that because I was doing a lot of shows and casting competitions and things. Even when I was quite young, I was getting exposed to a lot of very, very accomplished casters who were also very generous, with the time and what they knew. So, I mean, just a few like Gary Coxon. I knew Gary when I was very young. He helped me an awful lot. I was lucky I met Mel Krieger when I was young as well at Chatsworth, I think it was. He spent some time with me, and a lot of other people really who deserve equal mention. So I was very fortunate in that respect.
Nice, and they're great mentors to have, and I still remember fondly those shows. The favourite part for me was the shows in the morning or when it had shut for the first day, and there'd be yourself, Paul Proctor, Jim Fern, myself, and others getting up and having a cast and just playing. And those moments for me were to see, guys like you throwing a line and getting the chance to throw a line with you was absolutely phenomenal. They were pretty cool moments, weren't they?
Yeah, it was all. I mean, I'll be honest, that the whole show scene now is sort of, it's reduced really heavily from what it was. And I do miss a lot of that. I do miss the chats with Angling Fur, and Lowther's gone now as well, unfortunately. And those were, I had a lot of good times and learned a lot. And, yeah. So a little bit sad in some respects, but, there are still some of them out there, and they are coming back a little bit now. So who knows?
Do you think there's going to be that demand? We obviously have the BFFI, which is a great success, and there's been other shows that have not quite made it that I hoped deeply that they would. Do you think there is room, or there's a need, or do you think there's a demand for those sorts of things to come back again?
I would like to think there is, but it needs. I don't really know what it needs, if I'm being honest. I do hope they come back, and I do know that. I mean, I was at the game for the first time earlier on in the year, and that there was some signs that was starting to become a little bit more vital than it had been over a few previous years. There was definitely more people there. There was definitely some more stands there. There was a little bit more buzz about it. So maybe that's something that will grow. And hopefully it'll get back to the sort of if you like, the old days of Fisherman's Row, when it used to be the big CLA game with the big Fisherman's area, which we've not had for a few years now.
Yeah, that would be great to have back. Fingers crossed on that front. So, obviously, you work in fly fishing. Was that the next natural step? Did you make a decision after school that you wanted to work in fishing? Was it always going to be that, or if not, how did you end up working in fishing?
Yes, I mean, I just really wanted to go fishing all the time was the honest answer, but that doesn't work when you work in the fish and tackle industry. And somebody forgot to tell me that bit. I mean, basically, what happened for me was I left college with me qualifications, which have proved pretty much useless, to be honest. They've not really been any use to me at all at work. So I did that, and then I did a couple of jobs here and there, and I actually got on as I don't really know what I was, but I was working for Airflow at a lot of the country fairs just on weekends. So I did that for a little while. And I was actually going to go and work there full time. They offered me a job, and that fell through for various reasons. And I went back to my parents' holiday home because it was near the river, and I was just living and fishing there, in all honesty. And of course, the nearest tackle shop was John Norris in Penrith, and I was in there a lot. And I got talking to one of John's kids, either James or Laura, and before you knew it, I got offered a job in there. So I started work there. I think it was in the October, and I had 6 or 7 years were really happy years working there, where I was literally living on the banks of the river, going to work, going fishing, and that's all I did for about 6 years. And then to actually get to the next step when I got to Hardy's, how that came about was I knew Andy Murray very well. And Andy was somebody else who'd helped me with the casting when I was younger. And a job actually came up in the retail shop at Alnwick, and he put me forward for that. So I left John Norris's, where I've been the assistant manager, a technical manager, I can't remember the exact job description. And I went to the retail shop at Hardy's as the shop manager. And that was sort of where I stepped into got in the door of a manufacturer rather than a retailer in effect.
And then where did it lead from there? Because obviously, I think of rod design, and I think of yourself and Jerry and Peter Knox latterly and Jim Barchi. The three of you, I think, have probably had across the spectrum of rod design now. There's probably people I've forgotten, and apologies if I have, but you've had that sort of, when I think of rod designers, it's those 3/4 people. How did that come about that you were involved with that? And was it an easy step? Was it a comfortable one for you to make?
Yeah, I mean, basically what happened for me was, like I said, I was managing the shop, but I was involved with the product development with Andy, because Andy was the international sales manager, and he was doing the product development piece as well as his sort of full-time sales job. And back then we had a number of people in the building. We had a composites engineer, we had effectively a rod engineer, and then reel engineers as well. And as Andy sort of took more responsibility, I guess, on the sales side, I ended up taking a little bit of his responsibility on the product development side. So basically it was all in-house training effectively. And it basically just sort of morphed into that. And as the company sort of expanded a little bit, because at that time the company bought some other brands. We had Chubb and stuff like that, and Grey's had just come on board. The product development piece became bigger than it had been previously. So I sort of got moved out of the shop I was only in the shop for about 12 months or something like that. I got moved over into a product development assistant role, and then the next step was the product manager, and that was all basically, just sort of grew out from getting through the door as a shop manager. But to be honest, the background in competition casting, because I did a lot of competition casting way before I did any competition fishing. I'd already been to a world casting championships by then and competed against Steve Ray, Jeff, and people like that. So all of that background definitely helped when it got onto the sort of rod and product development side of it.
Yeah, fascinating to see. And have you seen, since you started on that design process, has technology made that role different or easier?
In some ways. I mean, the materials available now are a lot better than they were when I first started in the rod development aspect, particularly around the resins and mainly resin additives, really the stuff that goes in the resin to make the overall finished product either stronger, lighter, more impact resistant, or whatever particular attribute it brings to it. So the materials have definitely got better. You still can't take out the human element of it, of going outside and casting and feeling it, because at the end of the day, a fly rod is a tactile thing that we use, and it's not just about the numbers on the paper. It's about what it feels like when you're using it in the appropriate situation. There's a lot of soul in a fly rod, and that's something which I honestly think if you don't fish and you don't have a passion for it, you can never develop or design good product. It just doesn't work. I felt a lot of fly rods for certain kinds of fishing, and when you pick them up, you can tell whoever's behind this hasn't used it for what it's intended to be used for, or doesn't fish in that kind of way. I'm a big believer in that.
That was a beautiful term, a fly rod with soul, because that's exactly right. I absolutely love that. Does that mean then that you can tell subtle differences? And is it also difficult in some respects, knowing what a beautiful caster you are? Not everyone can cast as beautifully as you can. Do you have to take that into account as well?
Yeah, it depends on what particularly because I work on fly rods across a wide spectrum of prices, from entry-level stuff right up through to expensive stuff. So you've got to sort of take that a little bit into account. And yeah, I mean, we do use, it isn't just solely down to me. I have a group of testers, if you want to call them that, who are people, really the trusted pros, if you like, who I'll send equipment to. Katka's had some of it. We use Paul Proctor as well now. And then I've got a good network of people who I've got respect for. And I know that their opinions are valid. So if they say, look, I don't think this is right, I know that I can sort of trust it. And I tend to lean on certain people in certain kinds of fisheries more. So for example, like when it comes down to saltwater product, when I'm doing like tarpon rods, 10, 11 and 12 weight, unfortunately, there's no tarpon swimming around off the northeast coast of England. I wish there was, because I would fish for them.
It might not be long.
Yeah. Well, no, with global warming, they might get here at some point. Yeah. But I would fish for them every day. As it happens, I managed to do it about once a year. But, on the flip side of that, I've got access to Andy Mill, who is literally, I'll probably get grief for it, probably one of the best, if not the best, tarpon flats angler in the world. So he gets all the prototypes. He'll send them back and say, I like this, I don't like that. We work a lot with a guy called Nathaniel Linvale, who is, again, a phenomenal angler, a good friend of mine. I mean, that guy, when he doesn't know about flats fishing and IGFA style tournament fishing, is just not worth knowing. So we use him a lot as a sounding board. And it's a combined effort, really, between myself and a group of, well-picked sort of experts or pros or whatever you want to call them. Legends is a good one, because a lot of them are.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I remember Andy's stuff in Chasing Silver and how he was going into Tippet's strength and everything in the video there, which, if anyone gets the opportunity to watch, it's a fabulous film despite being 20 odd years old, I guess, now as well,
Yeah, I
isn't it?
mean, Andy's a super nice guy. For everything he's done in the world, he's very humble, and he's an incredible person to spend time around. I mean, the very first day, I'll tell you one little story. The very first day I fished in a skiff with him, we were out with a really, really good top-notch Keys guide, very well-known angler. And Andy said, "You get up on the front and fish." And I said, "No, look, I'd rather if you fished, and then I can, because I just want to watch you." And he went, "No, I get to do this all the time. Get on the front, it'd be fine." And the guide basically got me shot after shot all day. And I tried a few times to get Andy to take the rod, and he was like, No, it's fine. You just fish. You're doing great. And looking back, I was not doing great. Let's put it that way. And I think I managed to get one eat in the end, and I smashed it off, and I ripped its head off and blew the leader up, and 100-pound fish went somersaulting out through the fly. And I said, "Look, it was getting towards the end of the day. I said, look, just get up, Andy, and have a fish and show me how it's done." And then, I shouldn't say rather depressingly, but he got on the front in the last hour, and he made 3 casts and landed 3 fish. And when I say he made 3 casts, I mean he made 3 casts. It was like, there's a fish, he let it swim within range, he backhand flipped it short, wiggled it a couple of times, bumped it, stuck it, and had it boat side in 7 or 8 minutes. Pulled a bit further along down, boated a 100-pounder, pulled a bit further down, boated a 90-pounder, and that's like 3 fish in an hour. It's just like, yeah, all right then.
Oh, fantastic. Tell me, does your competition, because I know we were talking off mic about this a little bit, but the competition aspect come into the design as well? And there's a couple of reasons I mentioned that, in that I know you were writing for Total Fly Fisher at the time, and obviously now write for the Excellent Fly Fishing and Fly Tying. But I remember an article you wrote about using check nymphing was coming on the scene then, and you were written an article about advising people about using longer rods for rivers. And was that sort of what you were seeing on the competition scene, but also came into your rod design? Because I also have mentioned many times on here, when I was working with Nick Hart, that you sent down the Streamflex when they came out. There was some 10-footers and 9-foot rods, and they were sort of to river anglers at the time, and I mean the non-competition anglers, that we'd not sort of seen this stuff before. From your experiences and what you'd been using and trying, was that entering the fray for you as well, and helping with rod design?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing is, there's a lot of trickle-down effect from competitions into mass market. You don't always see it, but a lot of it does sink down from that sort of upper level down into the mass market in a lot of ways. And I can remember really well the Streamflex project at the time was sort of my idea in my role as the product and sort of brand manager at Gray's at the time, whatever the job was called. And I remember having to have quite a heated argument / discussion with the then commercial director, saying that, look, we should do 10-foot 3-weight and 4-weight rods in this range. And his position was, but there's no sales history on 10-foot 3 and 4-weight rods. Why should we develop something that nobody buys? And now my argument was, they don't buy it because it's not there. And there are these sort of niche rods. You can get them, but nobody's really doing a range of specific rods targeted for it in any real meaningful way. And eventually sort of gave in, and we did it, and it ended up actually being one of our best selling product launches in that relatively short space of time. It was and now they're in pretty much every rod range that we have in some format or another. But really, I'm not claiming I invented anything like that, because I didn't. It was, I saw, anglers in the French team, for argument's sake, were all using longer rods and lighter line sizes. When I was fishing competitions, you were seeing more people using that kind of stuff. And it wasn't readily available. We didn't have it in our product range, and a lot of other, brands didn't have it. So that's why we basically did the Streamflex range, and it's still in the range now in a slightly different format.
They were amazing rods, and I think for me the really interesting thing about that is, like you said, how well they sold, because you'd know much better than I, but I've kind of been around fly fishing a little while, that we're all a little fickle and it takes a little bit of time to catch on. But it struck me as well at the time that those rods really did catch on quickly. Do you think that was yourself writing about those things and letting people know about what was happening? Because, of course, there was no real internet to be able to let people know or make films about it at that time. So, it was amazing how quickly they really did take off, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. There was a few other things. There was some big competition results, some big competition wins were made with those kind of short line nymphing tactics, using some of the longer rods. You did have other things going on as well. I had the late Oliver Edwards, who was a great friend of mine, who sadly passed away earlier this year. He'd been over there and he'd seen longer rods and the short line nymphing. So all that kind of stuff was around. So there was just a little bit of a wave building of it. And the introduction of those Streamflex rods, I think, just sort of came at the right time. It was kind of the right product at the right price, in the right brand, when there was already quite a bit of noise about it. And, it did very, very well.
Yeah, no, they're great rods. Great rods. So, talking about yourself, we talked a little bit about competition and about how you like to try and do the things as best as you possibly can. But are you a competitive person by nature?
Yeah, in some ways. I think you have to be to enjoy competing. Competition fishing for me, some people do ask me, well, if it wasn't for competition fishing, would you still fish? Of course I would. I love fishing first and foremost. But I think the thing that really appealed to me in a competition perspective was that I don't think there's very few other kinds of fishing where you can fish maybe for 3 hours crawling around on your hands and knees and catch, a 6-inch fish and get the same adrenaline rush from that one 6-inch fish in 3 hours that you can from catching 10 3-pounders, doing something else. For me, when I competition fish, if there's a lot of fish and it's big numbers, I'll get an adrenaline rush from catching 20 or 30 small fish. If it's a really, really difficult fishing and it's one fish or one big fish or whatever it happens to be, I'll get the equal adrenaline rush from that and the equal excitement of it. So I think the competition framework, for me means whatever kind of fishing it is, I get the same gratification from it, whether it's easy or hard fishing. Whereas maybe if I was pleasure fishing and it was hammering down with rain and the conditions are bad and, I've got to crawl around to catch one little tiny fish in 3 hours, it's maybe not as fulfilling as it is in a competition scenario, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what was that moment like the first time you put on a blazer with a England badge on it? Was that a special moment for you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think my first international cap was actually a lock style cap, believe it or not. So I can remember my dad wrote a letter to Bob Church and asked him, how did I get in the England team? And Bob Church wrote back and said, you need to fish in lock style internationals kind of thing. And bear in mind, I was mainly a river fisherman. So I did actually get my first cap on a lock style event on, was it? I think it was Chew, might have been Chew Valley. So yeah, I got and I fished a home international on Loch Leven, and then after that I got the rivers caps, and I just basically stuck at the rivers and got like 5 rivers caps, because the rivers caps actually carried more weight than the lock style caps. So I did them all basically, and then I got another lock style cap and a small still waters cap to make the full set. And then I think I did my first Europeans in 2002 maybe, or 2002, 2003, something like that.
And is there a big difference between? Oh, tell me about it, man. Is there a big difference between sort of home international competitions and European and world? I suspect I know the answer to this, but what would your observations be in those differences? Are they huge?
It's an absolute gulf. I mean, I'll say it, it's controversial and I'll probably get grief for it, but I honestly think if you look at the world and European stage and you look at the home international stage, the home international framework, unfortunately, delivers people to world and European level just grossly underprepared for what they're facing. It's because of the formats of those competitions. And don't get me wrong, I fished a lot of home internationals and thoroughly enjoyed it. Unfortunately, the format is too dissimilar to what you face with in a world and Europeans. They're fished to different rules. It's fished to a different format. You're allowed to practice for home internationals, so people become overly dependent on practicing venues rather than when you get to a World or European, the venues are closed down, months in advance of the event, and you're not allowed to practice the actual places you're going to fish. So people don't get to that level with the basic skills of turning up at an unknown venue and working it out. And it's a massive thing. And then when you add on top of that, the complications and the intricacies of fishing a pegged match where you fish in a certain section of water that's already been fished up to 4 times, it's a different kind of fishing. Certain things make, a big, big difference. You've got strategy, you've got approach, you've got all of these things, which unfortunately in a lot of the home international events can be skipped by just practicing the death out the venue. And it doesn't make for there's a big learning, from going from that level to that level. There are some very, very good anglers at home international level. And, if that level of achievement at home international level transferred directly into world championships, we would have probably multiple world champions, but we don't. So that in itself, I think, tells you something about the difference between the two.
Lovely and nicely put and fairly put as well. And you've done them all, so I think you're perfectly well qualified to comment on them as well. So does that mean that the margins between being a competitor and being champion of the world, are they paper thin?
Yes. It's not a big gulf between being there or thereabouts and actually being in the medals. I think really the best way you can look at it is when you turn up at the World Championships, out of the anglers who are there, depending on how many countries are fishing, there's probably somewhere in the region of, maybe it's a guess, 50 anglers who are capable of medaling. Maybe it's a few more. But what you need is, first of all, that group of anglers, they need to have a draw that is capable of producing a winning result. Because with the best will in the world, you can put the best angler on a well below average draw, and he's going to turn it into more than a poor angler will, but he'll not necessarily turn it into a medal. So you need to have the basics of having a decent beat draw in order to be able to do it. And then you've got to fish it in the right way. You've got to have a good team around you to fall back on, so that you've got 5 anglers basically feeding in, so that you've effectively got 5 people's experience and practice and ongoing learnings through that competition, all feeding into each other. And then one person will, typically, if they've got the right peg draw, will come out on top. So there's a lot going on. But when it comes down to the actual difference between winning and not winning, I mean, for me in Tasmania, when I was, if you want to call it lucky enough to win it, whatever, it was the format of that event was 3 lakes and 2 rivers. So I only had to ride the draw twice, not 5 times. So because on the lakes you can go anywhere you want. So 3 of them, I had a degree of control over my own destiny, if you like, that you don't always get. But over those 5 sessions, when I look back now, because I actually tied on placing points with David Garcia from Spain. So we were both tied on placing points, and it had to go back to fish points count back to splitters in the end. So when I looked afterwards after the event, when all the dust had settled, it literally came down, the difference between me winning and him winning came down to 3 separate fish over the 5 days that I caught. And if any one of those 3 fish I hadn't caught or I hadn't landed, I would have been second or worse, probably third or fourth. And when I think back to how and at what point I caught some of those fish, it's frightening how far I was off actually not getting over the line again, because previously in 2012 I had a similar thing. I rode the draw well, I fished well. I was first to second for the whole event, and then I slipped to 4th place in the 4th session when I had a killer draw, and that nearly finished me off. That did, in 2012, I was so close, and then to end up 4th was just painful. But yeah, it's worth the thin margins at the top. It really is.
Wow. And does that mean then, well, there's a couple of questions that come out of that, I guess. One of them is, what was that like when they were counting back? Were you getting a sense that you were getting close? And then when you found out, was that a long time in between? And then, like you said previously, how difficult is that to pick yourself back up again from?
Yeah, so first of all, the picking back up from 12, that was hard. I mean, in 2012, I came 4th. In 2013, I came 109th. I went to Norway for the World Championships. It was a tough championships. The world champion that year caught a fish in all 5 sessions. It was incredibly difficult fishing. The venues weren't good. I caught 1 fish in 5 days, and I was right near the bottom. And I had a few other things going on, which meant I didn't fish as well as I maybe could have done, some personal stuff. But after that, I started to build a little bit of momentum again. 2014, we had a team bronze in the Czech Republic, which was good. And then in 2017, I was 10th individual in Slovakia. Decent result. I didn't have a brilliant draw, but I did okay and got in the top 10, so I was happy with that. And then obviously went to Taz in 19 and managed to win it individually. But I can remember. So when the last session was fished, it was interesting. There was myself. I went into the last day and the last session in the lead, and in second place was the Italian Federico Santamantini. He's the son of a 2 times former world champion. And it was between me and him in first and second. And then obviously everybody else was very, very close as well in that top sort of 4 or 5 places. But Federico was on my coach. So we were fishing the same venue on the last day. So I knew that if I didn't beat him, he would overtake me in that final day. So we went out on the lake, we fished. I think I got 5 fish. I think I caught 5 or 4. And I think it was 5. And we came back in at the end, so straight away, of course, I'm looking for. Oh no, sorry, I had 4. I definitely had 4 fish. So at the end, I'm looking for him, to find out when he's got, and there was no sign of him. So I think it was the Canadian captain, came down and said, "Are you looking for Federico?" Because obviously they all know the scores. And I said, "Yeah, where is he?" He said, "He's still fishing." I said, "Well, the match is finished. What's going on?" He said, "Well, his boat broke down, so they've invoked the rule where he's getting his time back. So he's got an extra 30 minutes to fish. So he's still out there. So I'm sitting on the bank waiting. And then eventually he came in, and as he was motoring across the lake, he sort of pointed, which is the universal sign for how many fish have you got. So I pointed at him, and he gave in and stuck his fingers up, and he'd got 3, and I'd obviously got 4. So I knew I'd beaten him, or thought I'd beaten him. And then at that point, then you've just got to put it out your head. So I got back on the coach, and we're travelling, and I'm trying to keep my head down, because what happens on the coach, especially after the last session, everybody's texting and everybody's ringing, and they're all trying to work the results out. So I'm trying to avoid it all, because I'm thinking, well, I'm either there or I'm thereabouts. I don't know. Thinking I can't do anything. I've just got to forget about it. And we were about, I don't know, halfway back to the hotel, and the Polish angler, he's been former world champion as well, really nice guy. His name evades me at the minute, but he pointed at me down the coach and just sort of waved his finger and then put up a number 1. And I sort of shook my hands, because I'm thinking, well, you can't possibly know. You cannot guarantee it. You can't work it out. And he came down and he said, "No, you are the champion. You have won." And I said, "No, please don't say that to anybody, because you don't know." He said, "No, you have won by 1 placing point." I said, "But you can't know that. You can't know that." But of course, then it sort of crept around the coach, and there was a lot of cheering and foot stamping and all that kind of stuff. But I still didn't know. And when we got back to the hotel and started to ask around a little bit, it transpired that David Garcia had finished 2 places higher than the Polish guy had allowed for. So instantly then it's all, where's he finished, where's he not finished? So I said to the rest of the team, "I can't handle this. We're going to the pub." So we walked straight out the hotel, skipped the dinner, and went up the road to an Italian restaurant and just sat in there just to get away from it all. And I can remember I wasn't looking at my phone, but everybody else was trying to, see for the results coming up. And then all of a sudden there was a lot of stuff on Facebook saying, "Oh, has Howard won it or has he not won it? I don't understand the results." So somebody looked and they said, "The results are up." I said, well, just tell us, just put us out. He said, "Well, you can't read them." And what they'd done is they put a picture up of the results, and it was out of focus. So you couldn't actually read anybody's names. And all you could see was the length of the name of the person at the top. And of course, they're all saying, "Well, your name's longer than his, and the second name's shorter, so we think you've won." I'm saying, "But no, his name's David Ferreras Garcia, so it's longer." But you couldn't actually tell. And in the midst of all that argument, somebody just put up a picture of it actually in focus, and we'd tied on place points. So it was probably, I don't know, I'd say the most stressful 3 hours of my life, but it probably wasn't, because I am quite good at times at putting things out of my head. And I just sort of switched off to it and thought, it either is or it isn't. I just have to wait and see. And luckily for me, in the end, it was. So, but yeah, a little bit mental to think back now.
Huge congratulations on that. And that's some achievement. I guess that must have been a surreal walk back from the Italian to the hotel where I'm guessing a lot of the competitors were.
It was, yeah, and it was, a lifelong dream, to be honest, and walking back in and being besieged by a lot of people who I've known for a lot of years, and a lot of very good friends I've had over the years, and it was it was an unreal experience. Money can't buy that. I've spent tens of thousands of pounds of my own money competing over the years because it's not well funded. We have to fund ourselves and fundraise and all sorts of stuff. And I'll be honest, it's worth every penny. It was a lifelong dream. I have to be honest, my only regret is that my dad didn't see it. He died not that long before. And, that was obviously, a regret. I would have loved for him to see it. He always had faith in me when I was a lot younger that I would do it at some point. So that does hurt a little bit, but, I did it in the end. So I was, I know I'd be very proud of it. So, yeah.
Nice job. From that moment, then the next one, is that a different sort of motivation? You said about picking yourself up. What is the mindset comparable to, like you said, getting your ass kicked, yet coming into the next one as world champion? Is it a different mindset?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, when I was a little bit lost after I won, when I came home. The reason being, I was used to coming back from an event and ripping a lot of things back down. So things I'd learned and things I'd picked up, I would instantly try and start rolling it into my own, just from the, how my gear was set up or what I'd seen, or, something maybe with the flies that was a little bit different or whatever. And I would start to immediately work on the next year, to try and get over that line. And I did lose a little bit of that for a short time, I'll be honest, because it wasn't an anticlimax at all, but it was like, well, hang on, I've been striving to do this for all these years, and now all of a sudden it's hanging on the wall, with all these names on it, and my name's on the bottom of it as well. So it was just a little bit weird. But, that did come back. And I've done a few world championships since. To be honest, now, because I've sort of been the captain and the manager, as well as just being an angler, I've been putting more of my efforts into the rest of the team rather than my own preparation. Taz was actually the first year that I'd been the manager, and in some respects, it actually helped me get over the line, I think, because I just focused on what made a difference, and it gave me a bit more clarity of thought, I think, in the competition, because I was worried about everything else that was going on as well. So I just concentrated on my own fishing for very short spells. And when I fished in the actual event in 19, I only did the things that had made a difference in practice. I didn't get distracted by anything. And since then, I think I've been trying to put more effort into the team and develop the anglers who've qualified, and basically, giving them a head start, which I didn't really get, to be honest, when I first made it into a world or a European, because it was a sort of different scenario and a different setup. So, yeah, so it's been an interesting few years since I won it anyway. Let's put it that way.
Fantastic. Tell me, are you, from the lad who was fishing that little overgrown stream in the Lake District to what you've done in fly fishing now, are you enjoying it just as much?
The fishing part? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll be honest now, I've been very fortunate. I've travelled a lot of places. I've fished in, almost on the entire bucket list. Not quite, but I've fished all of these places. And I'm probably now happiest stood in the middle of the River Eden or the Eamont, not so much the Lowther anymore because I don't fish it that often, in June probably, in the evening, spinners, sedges when the light goes, blue-winged olives a little bit early depending on how hot it is. That for me is, I still enjoy that as much as anything else I've done in fly fishing. And probably because I don't get to do it as much as I used to when I lived there, probably more so. It's of all the fishing I did this last year past, I managed to get 4 days in June when we had that really hot weather. And the spinner fishing in the evenings was just like I remember from when I was, 17, 18, living over there. Just absolutely epic fishing every night, flat water, big fish rising, just phenomenal. And I'd rather do that, I think, than anything else.
Nice. Nicely put. That speaks volumes. Would you change anything about your life in fishing? I know you're not even remotely close to the end of it by any means, but looking back now, would you change anything?
I don't know, really. It's a difficult one. I mean, when I set off from a career perspective, I always wanted to be aligned to brands that I wanted to be aligned to. I didn't want to move around and chase the money, if you like, or jump ship. And I've been fortunate in that I've managed to do that, particularly with the Hardy brand. Although, I have had a lot of options to move around in my career, but I've never really taken them. And, you could sometimes say, well, what if I'd have done that and what if I'd have done this? But overall, it's worked out very well. I also met my wife at work, and, so there's a lot of things like that which, you can't, you probably really shouldn't wish to change. From a fishing perspective, no, I don't think there is. I've enjoyed what I've done. I'm still enjoying it. No, it's been a good ride, and hopefully it continues to be so.
Nice. From I was kind of thinking a little bit about starting to wind things up a little bit now. And is there a little bit, though, of pride that if you're on a fishery on the river somewhere and you bump into someone and they've got a Hardy and Gray's rod, is there a bit of pride there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I get some very nice comments of people sometimes just out of the blue. I'll just get a Facebook message or whatever and saying, "Oh, I just bought such a thing and I love it. It's been, here's a fish I caught." And I do get quite a lot of that as well, and that's always good. And I do bump into people quite a lot on the river, and it's quite funny because a lot of times people don't realise or don't recognise me or whatever. It's understandable, and they'll say, "Oh, I've got this rod and blah blah blah, blah and it's really nice, but I don't know what fly line I should really put on it," and so that's quite interesting sometimes. And you can give people a bit of advice, and occasionally they'll then twig that quite a lot about it, and they'll ask you, "Oh, do you work in the industry?" Something like that, and then I never like saying, to be honest, so I always try and avoid it to some degree. But I've, the guys I fish with sometimes will just plow straight in and say, "Oh, well, he designed it, so he should know," and then that just starts a totally different conversation. So yeah, it can be quite funny sometimes.
Lovely. Howard, thank you. It's been wonderful catching up with you. It's been wonderful chatting and you giving so much to us. It's been a wonderful interview. Last one for you. Soundtrack in the car. We've done this thing. We have a little fly culture, Spotify. I think I called it the road trip or something like that. Give me a tune that sets the tone. Maybe I can imagine you now on the coach on the way to a competition with the earphones in, like the footballers before the game. What's the tune that we add to our list?
Well, for me, it might be a bit cheesy, I don't know, but when on the last session, when I was going to Little Pine in the Worlds in 2019, and I just had my iPhone on shuffle, and the song that was actually playing as we were on the sort of final straight to the lake was "The Man" by the Killers, and for some reason, that just, for me now, if I'm going to a competition or in the Worlds and everything, I've always got that on because it's sort of like a lucky song as well for me now. Yeah. I needed a bit of luck in the last session and I got it, so yeah, that'll do it.
Great choice. I'm going to add that one after we finished. It's been wonderful chatting with you. Thank you so much. How can people, if they've used a Hardy or Gray's rod and enjoy it and love it, what are your socials? How can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on, I think Facebook is Howard Croston Fly Fisher, or Howard Croston Fly Fishing, and then on Instagram is Howard Croston Fly Fisher, I think it is. So yeah, you can always, I can be found on there pretty easily, I think.
Fantastic, mate. It's been lovely to catch up with you. It's been lovely to chat with you. Thanks so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
No problem. Thanks a lot, Pete. Much appreciated.
Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. As ever, there will be plenty of episodes coming very, very soon. Thanks for listening.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.